Without any further ado, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome my very good colleague and acclaimed and award-winning playwright, James Kenworth. Now, James has written a lot of plays, a lot of site-specific plays. He's written plays about specific issues like dementia and won awards for them. But today he's going to talk to us about a play that's reimagining a classic, Animal Farm. And how do you modernize that, and how you include some of multicultural London English that we're talking about in our previous seminar to that play, and how you make it site-specific and what are all the methodological issues involved in that. So he's going to talk to us about this. But just as a preview of his next project, so I asked him, what do you think about doing next? So his next project is also going to be something site-specific and reimagining a classic. I'm not going to say any more about that because I want that to be a surprise when it's announced.
Oh, wow. Do I talk about now or no, another time? Yeah.
Another time.
Remain to be secret, yeah. Okay. But it will be site-specific. Thank you very much, Anna. That was fantastic. Okay. I just thought before going into the paper, just the trailer, which I hope works. My students will know that I'm nervy around this technology. I was about to say Middlesex technology, but I might get into trouble there. So I hope it works. I'll show you the trailer, which was filmed by Middlesex film students of Revolution Farm, just to give you an idea of what it looked like, because it's quite important, the hoodie, as it were, aspect, the visual look of this. As Anna said, this was a complete reworking. As far as the language is concerned, of Orwell's, and as you say, classic. I mean, I still can't believe that I got a chance to do that. And if we get time, I may just mention how I got permission. I doubt very much anybody could get permission now. I'm even struggling to understand how I got permission, because there's quite a few adaptations circulating. But anyway, I've got a hunch of why we were allowed to do it. So hopefully this will... The trailer.
The enemy always was, always will be. Whose side are you on?
Break their bones! Kick their antics! Let's shut up! Break their bones! Kick their antics! Let's shut up!
Brothers and sisters, the time had come when each and every one of us had to decide whether we were going to be the problem or whether we were going to be the solution.
Feel free to join in, my friend.
Rules are what scum do.
Scum ain't in charge no more. We are!
And we can do what we like.
Let's begin. Okay, so that's the title of the presentation on paper: 4 legs badass, 2 legs wasteman, and obviously we'll look into detail about that. Reimagining Orwell for Austerity Britain. So as it says, I'll explore the process, methodology of adapting a literary classic with a contemporary spin, as Anna was talking about, using particularly urban, inner city, London dialect, whatever that might mean. We'll look at what it might mean there. And using an emphasis on a creative, expressive approach to playwriting, which I'm very fond of, very keen about. I've got my one of my wonderful supervisors here, and we've had this discussion about, I'm not a big fan of naturalistic playwriting, social realism, although I know I've been taken to task for, not applying perhaps, the correct terms, but I am very, very keen with theatre, new playwriting, about using expressive, lyrical, imaginative, creative language, because I think, the audience, it is really interesting, prepared to suspend their disbelief. Whereas my argument would be, if you had expressive writing, lyrical writing on TV, I think you'd get raised eyebrows. You know, people go, they talk funny. But for some reason in the theatre, you can get away with very poetical writing. But anyway, I'm slightly going for the point. The paper will also address the challenges of setting the play on an inner-city farm and how the use of non-conventional theatre spaces affects and reconfigures the relationship between a play and audience. So hopefully this is... Yeah, I'm going to kind of read off here because this is an edited version of a paper I presented at a creative writing conference. Let's just begin then at the beginning, funnily enough. 2014, I was given permission by AM Heath agents. They represent George Orwell estate, which obviously it's not as heavily, possibly you could say paranoidly protected as Samuel Beckett. Samuel Beckett, you can't change a thing. You know, commas or any punctuation, but still very protected. And I will perhaps come back to that about how the application I made to the George Orwell estate to modernise Orwell's satire, because that was the aim, and give it a contemporary twist. And as it says here, you know, and incorporate language, you know, with a gritty, urban, in-your-face style. So. Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing to be said about this is rewriting Orwell. That's a privilege and an honour, without sounding too precious. Good, fantastic. More the merrier. It's clearly a privilege and honour. I think that's fair to say. We can all understand why, you know, it being George Orwell. But it also could look like an act of monumental folly. I mean, you really can. I mean, talk about choosing. He's quite well known, isn't he, George Orwell? You know, I could have chosen perhaps, you know, an author you hadn't really heard of, a neglected author. So I felt both emotions, privilege and honour. Privilege and hubris very keenly. How on earth do you do it? So that's what it's going to address. How do you do it? Now, the play you just saw on the trailer, it was unique in another respect, that it was staged on one of London's longest established and largest inner-city farm, Newham City Farm, which is home to a large collection of farmyard favourites such as cows, horses and sheep. And it's got, you should visit Newham City Farm, it's wonderful. And it certainly was for us, you know, because we had a combination of professional actors and, as you saw in the trailer, young people, from the area, local area. And, you know, we literally did go and just watch the animals if we needed to be reminded about certain movements. You know, and there is the star animal is Alfie, the Berkshire pig, on Newham City Farm, who seems to, you know, turn wallowing into mud an art form. But it was very interesting having all the animals around us when we were rehearsing. I'm very pleased to say, and I hope, you know, I risk being called, you know, unbelievably big-headed here, but the show received a lot of coverage and very good reviews. So I think I did okay. In adapting it from the independent British City Guide and BBC broadcaster journalist Libby Purves, and was also listed in Time Out top 10 shows to see in August. My favourite independent, Paul Taylor, called it the play a terrifically powerful update of Orwell's classic, which I think is, for me, that's the best review I've ever had, to do something like that with Animal Farm. So how did we get to that stage where you get the independent saying a terrifically powerful update? How did I get here? As it says, how did I get there? How did I take Orwell out? The answer is, it sounds very macho. I went in hard. Yeah, I went in all guns blazing. But you'll see what I mean by that. It's this quote that is a big help. You know, it's a lovely quote. Ignorance, sheer ignorance. There's no confidence to equal it, is there really? The confidence of ignorance is only when you know something about a profession that you are timid or careful. There's a truth in that, isn't it? You know, when you don't know about something, you go blindly in. And it does give you a kind of, you know, maybe false, but it does give you a kind of courage, or at least insensitivity, which sometimes, you know, is not a bad thing to have. So, as I've written, I went for the jugular in terms of Animal Farm's most famous lines. And here we go. So my apologies to Orwell purists or traditionalists. The shocking truth, I did it right at the start of the adapting process. Besides having the confidence ignorance on my side, I hadn't even read the novella at this point. I'd read it, to be honest, when I was a child, but I hadn't gone back to it, deliberately so. I reasoned that if I could topple some of the best-known lines in contemporary English literature, then I might gently but firmly push Orwell aside, and start to try and realise my own voice. We know one of the most famous lines is this one. 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. Very well known, that, a classic, iconic. So my kind of creative thinking was, as the new version was set on an inner city farm, and its visual aesthetic, as you saw in the trailer, was essentially informed by hoodies and trackies. I knew that slang, vernacular, and the dramatic of urban London was going to feature quite heavily in my new version. So I live in East London. I live in Beckton, where Newham City Farm is. So I'm quite familiar with that kind of, that urban, whatever you call it, multicultural English or gritty language. So out went good and in came badass, and out went bad and in came wasteman. Do you know what wasteman means? What's it mean? Yeah. We'll go into a full explanation. Let's have a look at those slang terms. I like this, the Urban Dictionary. How does it define badass? It's the question is on everybody's lips. I love this. So this is from the Urban Dictionary. A badass isn't someone who wears ripped leather jackets. A badass isn't someone who breaks stuff to look tough. And a badass isn't someone who fights for the fun of fighting. That's the definition of a poser. A badass does not try to be a badass to look tough. A badass is simply a badass. Absolutely, we all knew that, didn't we? There you go. If you want to be a badass, that's how you do it. Now, apologies for the faint-hearted. Synonyms for badass. Ultra cool and motherfucker. Now, I am not going to use that word, changing Orwell's lines. You couldn't do it. Okay. But let's now have a look about what the Urban Dictionary says about wasteman. Again, it's quite amusing. It's an insult, as you said. Someone who does nothing with their life, or nothing much. E.g., Jimmy drops out of school and has no job and claims benefits for 5 years and still lives at home with his mum and has dirty clothes. Jimmy is a wasteman. Okay, so that's putting it quite, I think that's putting it quite succinctly there. So, as I say, I think you get the point. Badass is cool, being a wasteman is mostly decidedly not. So it's a kind of, come up with this result, repeat after me, Conrad. So 4 legs badass, 2 legs wasteman. It seems to fit there with the version I'm looking at. All animals, the next one, I wonder if that is the most well-known. All animals are equal, but some are more equal than others. I must admit, that was scary. Because I thought you could get away with, 4 legs, changing that. But all animals are equal, but some are more equal than others. So, as I said, I've written here, if I thought taking on 4 legs good, 2 legs bad was nerve-wracking, then, surely this is unimprovable, that line. It's unimprovable, and in a way, that was the answer. It's unimprovable. As I said, therein lied the answer, I think, how to do it. It doesn't need changing, well, only a bit, I think. Just needs a little simplifying, popularising, perhaps even, dare I say it, a little dumbing down. Apologies to George Orwell. The only word that needs changing is the slightly old-fashioned, in my opinion, feel of equal, to be replaced by perhaps a more instant, accessible and everyday equivalent. So it became, all animals are the same, but some are not so same as others. And it was as simple as that. Well, I say simple, it took me a while to have the confidence again to come up with something like that where it hasn't changed hugely. Just on a note about, obviously, I think as I've already kind of intimated, and I'm sure you understand that it's taking on one of the icons of English literature is very scary, and the problem is, well, the problem for me was sticking too close to the original, because it's so fantastic, it's so brilliant. Why are you doing it? And I think it's as I say, it's very scary. You do feel a fraud, an imposter, a charlatan. All sorts of dreadful low self-esteem issues come to the fore about your writing, because of course in effect you're comparing yourself to Orwell, which is ridiculous. However, there is a way out. I did find it, but it might shock some people. Let's have a look. So it was a little trick I discovered to get over the fear factor. You know, this enormous Everest that is Orwell. It sounds frivolous, reckless, almost disrespectful to Orwell. But the fact is, George was always looking over my shoulder. I was really conscious, self-conscious of it. I felt more than a little nervous. He had to leave the room. Very dramatic. George Orwell had to leave the room when I was trying to get my own version going. Now, how was this done? Here it comes. The admission. Shocking admission. The shocking truth is I only read Animal Farm once. Only once. And even then I only skim-read it. What I did is, and I never returned to it. Instead, I used, wait for it, a cartoon at the back of a GCSE English Animal Farm text guide. I know some of you may remember this. These text guides, they're about 2 pages, and the pigs have got speech bubbles. And it tells the story in 2 pages. It's a cartoon. It's a comic strip, essentially, with speech bubbles. And if that sounds rather sacrilegious, my sort of plea for forgiveness is that even on one reading of Animal Farm, and I did a draft after reading Animal Farm once, skim reading it, and guess what I produced? It's almost a facsimile of Orwell's style. Slightly different, but still too close to his style, which is, as you know, famous, I think fair to call it famously, deceptively simple and friendly style. So there wasn't I couldn't see any reason why you'd want my version, if it was still too close to Orwell. So the fact is, all I needed to do was, thankfully it's not a plot on a par with War and Peace. It's quite a simple plot. But all I needed was that cartoon to show me what events happen when. I didn't want to see one word of Orwell's writing. So that gave me quite a bit of a vacuum to work in, as it were, or a bit of space, my own space to work in, as long as I knew what happened next. Okay, so the animals plot the revolution. What happens after that? Oh yeah, they chuck the farmer off. What happens after that? Power struggles start. Okay, right. That leaves me free to put my own language in. Because this is, clearly it's supposed to be my version. I'd been given permission to do it, inspired by Orwell, obviously, but definitely my own version as far as the language, not the story or the plot. That would be crazy, I think, to change, or it would be a different project. It would be a different play altogether if you were going to change that, adapt that plot for your own purposes. So as I said, as I've just said, I reasoned that as I knew the plot well, I could put the book down, take a deep breath, hold my nerve, and begin to populate my own inner city farm version of Animal Farm. So I'd like to say, a big public thank you to CGB, the publishers of this Animal Farm text guide. Gave me the courage to ask George, as it were, to leave the room. So in my version, and once you do that, I think once you just, I don't want to know, I don't want to read it, all I need to know is the plot, all I need is I thought, well, out goes the farmer. I don't think you really need it. And then you start getting a bit, you start getting confident, possibly even arrogant. Oh, George, why do you have the farmer in it? Well, it's a book and mine's a play. So I don't need the farmer. We do not need the farmer. It's clear, it's going to be obvious. The farmer is a bully in my version, okay? And we'll show you how to do this. And we don't need humans. They don't need humans in my version at all. It's a performance piece. The audience can fill in the gaps. I say partly it was a practical response. We did have a small class, but again, Ola will know this. It's a big theme with me. Is with theatre that gives too much away. Possibly you could argue that's what naturalism does. Where there's no space for the audience to fill in their own gaps. So we were relying on the audience's acceptance and imagination, and if we got it right, they might even enjoy. I hope they did, filling in the gaps themselves. So here's the opening 3 lines from Revolution Farm. Right at the beginning of the play. The animals have called a secret meeting at midnight. A sheep and goat check on Mr. Jones. Allude to your imagination what image you might have of the farmer. That's it, as simple as that. We good? We good. He's drunk. What, again? It's a clear idea, I think, I hope. Clearly, the farmer doesn't care at all about the animals. Okay, neglects them. Now, even after they chase the farmer away and their victory is theirs, the animals sense the revolution isn't quite complete yet. And this was another way, what's coming next, which again may horrify Orwell purists or animal farm purists. As you can see, I started getting more and more confident. And I thought, you know what? Let's change the names. Isn't that incredible of me? You know, yeah, I'm on a roll here. I don't want Napoleon. I don't want these old-fashioned names. That's Orwell. I want my own names, okay, for the animals. So, as you see here, the white pig, that's what it's called in the original. In my language, says, I've still got a scum name. You still got one. We all still got scum names, i.e. human. The names human gave us. So naturally, they give each other names. So what did I give them? The revolution's visionary, the one who puts the seed of revolution in the animal's head, Old Major becomes Old Boy. And that's a nod to the play's East London roots, where this expression is, still is sometimes in use to denote a wise old man. Quite like old boy. Oh, he's an old boy. You've got to give him respect. If you're an old boy in the East End, you get a lot of respect. Okay. Snowball is given hero, essentially to denote his noble intentions regarding the revolution. He really is power to the people, hero. Now, Napoleon's mouthpiece, Squealer, gets given Smoothie, the name Smoothie, as befits an oily PR propaganda machine. Obviously, he's Napoleon's mouthpiece, but I thought it'd be better to call him Smoothie than Squealer. I think the big and strong but gullible boxer, the horse, could only be called Warrior. The friendly and maternal Clover was nicknamed Little Monster because she was tough, feisty, and spoke her mind. And Napoleon, that was really interesting. That was difficult to do, actually. Napoleon, because they give each other names. They invent names for themselves. They discuss it. Napoleon eventually settled on Daddy Love for himself. The idea being that the principal tyrant was a psychopathic megalomaniac that hid behind a facade of unity and harmony that would fool all the animals, hence Daddy Love, i.e. we're all one family. When I say that there's rules, I do it for your benefit. I'm your father, I'm your daddy. So it's that idea. And of course that was Daddy Love writing that last sentence, not me. She's a very manipulative creature. Trickle-up economics, it's usually known as trickle-down economics. And I'll explain the significance of that. The new version's aim was to take Orwell's satire on greed and corruption and give it a distinct whiff of austerity Britain by setting it on an inner-city farm in one of the poorest parts of the UK. According to the Index of Multiple Deprivation in 2007, Newham, where I live and work, is one of the most deprived areas in the country, ranking 6 out of 354 local authorities in England, where one is most deprived. Newham's also an area of low engagement with the arts, what the Arts Council calls cold spot. That's very artistic, isn't it? Cold spot. To describe an area where there's not much arts going on. Now, these statistics and facts about Newham, I felt would give the play's performance environment a politically charged or resonant context. Even if few of the audience would be in possession of this information, which I don't think they would be, unless you were, I don't know, you were working or living in Newham, and you were interested in that kind of, those kind of statistics. But the important thing is, and I've got images I can show at the end of the farm, but it would be impossible, I feel, for visitors and spectators not to recognise that Newham City Farm and its surrounding environments belong to one of the most deprived areas in the country. I'm being a bit. This is probably unfair and it's a bit crude to say, but it's it's not pretty. It's not pretty walking up to Newham City Farm, and we'll come back to how we kind of played on those possibly middle-class fears, that as they were walking towards the farm, were they going to be attacked? Now, the irony, I think also, the irony certainly wouldn't be lost on the audience of performing the show. I mean, you'd watch the unfolding of the revolution and you could see Canary Wharf, in the background, the towers of Canary Wharf. Workplace of many of the most powerful, I think, in probably know this, powerful and affluent people in the UK and home to many of the world's banks. That was a really interesting backdrop to have. As I say, the farm sits in the shadows, Canary Wharf, a symbol of global wealth and power. A little bit of sort of a brief history of economic theory here in the 80s. It was born out of Canary Wharf. How did it come about? Out of Margaret Thatcher's free market revolution. So I'm putting this quite crudely again, but, pull back the state. Let's pull back the state so, there is no safety net, and just release all this, supposedly, all this powerful individual initiative, and it'll all trickle down, the money will all trickle down and more, have more employment. So that promised wealth, as I say, would eventually trickle down to everyone else. I came across this, which I thought was interesting. Acclaimed broadcaster and journalist Giles Fraser denies in a recent walk. It's worth doing the walk. It's quite eye-opening, made from Bethnal Green to Canary Wharf. He says Tower Hamlets is proof positive that it doesn't. If anything, it flows the other way. Have a walk around Bow and Whitechapel and Bethnal Green, then go to the great glass towers of Canary Wharf, still in the borough, but in all other ways of another world completely. No, wealth is sucked upwards, it doesn't trickle down. So a new version of Orwell's classic tale of greed and exploitation with one of the UK's main financial centres at its backdrop. I mean, the subversive potential of the farm, was one of the things that attracted me to doing the project. How am I doing? Yeah, it's not too bad. Just having a look at when it's called negotiations here, because this is about negotiating with the space, with the farm, because that obviously it's a working farm. We couldn't take it over, we couldn't shut it down. So just to start this section, in Richard Schechner's seminal book about his pioneering environmental theatre, or site-specific theatre, as perhaps we call it now, site-responsive theatre, in the 1960s, he describes two ways of understanding theatrical environment. First, there's what one can do with a space and in a space. Secondly, there is the acceptance of a given space. In the first case, one creates an environment by transforming a space. In the second case, one negotiates with an environment, engaging in a scenic dialogue with space. So, we had to do the second case. They did, I remember in some of the rehearsals, they did cordon off a little part of the farm, but, they couldn't shut that farm while we're rehearsing. But obviously, as far as the performances was concerned, I'm just quickly going ahead here, as far as they were in the evening, you'll be glad to hear the animals were, they were locked away firmly at the other end of the farm. Because I remember the farm manager saying, if we kept them round where you are, they would go berserk, because the audience comes in and they'd all get very nervous. And I was tempted to say, what, you mean they might have a revolution? Probably wouldn't have gone down well, that. I think, they were all very patient with us, the farm. So we had to negotiate with Newham City Farm in a, practical, in a commonsensical way. There were certain parts of the farm were off limits, and the animals were, as I said, were locked away nightly away from the public in enclosures at the other end of the farm for obvious reasons. It would just scare them. Just too many people would scare the animals. Aside from these conditions, we were free to negotiate and engage in a scenic dialogue with the sections of the farm that were designated the performance space. So let's have a look at that. There's a lot of spaces in Newham City Farm to play with, if you're lucky, if you're fortunate enough to do a project like this. So we had, as I said, we had a number of spaces to set the action of the play in. They were all in close proximity. So it's promenade, the performance. So the audience are walking round, and we're kind of using stage manager to gently shepherd people to go to the, to follow the action. But it's some promenade performance, so you walk quite a long way, but they were all close together. So I didn't think it would be ever, there would be any problems there. As I said, so it was, we made that decision early on, or the director, I should say. I had nothing to do with it, to be honest. I don't really, when I write plays, I don't really think visually, so I think it was down to the director and the designer. It's got to be promenade. With the audience following the thread of the story around the farm. Now, each farm space was individually negotiated with. That's coming back to this environmental theatre work. The barn and we've got some photos of this, the barn was blacked out with tarpaulin and sprayed with graffiti slogans to emphasise the clandestine, subversive nature of the animal's plot to overthrow the farmer. And it also served as a death chamber for the killing of the so-called traitors. The outdoor learning space became a makeshift classroom where the guileless animals are indoctrinated into the new rules of the farm. So all these spaces are for, for obviously for the public. In terms of the outdoor learning space, you'll often have school visits, clearly. And the same with the barn. And you can have performances in the barn. So it was quite fun actually to look at all these spaces and think, how could you split the play's plot, the play's narrative, using virtually all of these spaces? And last we used the horses' paddock, minus the horses, I hasten to add, obviously, served as a North Korean-style military parade, signalling the abject failure of the revolution, when at the end of the play, the new soldiers, and these were kids playing the new soldiers, so it gave it, I have to say, it gave it quite a resonance. Talking really young kids, completely indoctrinated. They were doing all this. I thought it was really quite powerful. So that when they salute and cheer for the rulers with absolute obedience. So the use of the space was really, really interesting to do, but that's not something that's something that was in my mind when writing it. Not at all. It may be with some other writers, but as you perhaps may have, I think you may have seen, at the beginning of this session with my relationship with technology, my relationship, with practicalities, like, how am I going to use all these spaces? Oh, design and director who can do that, So they had were involved in these negotiations. Interesting subheading or heading. We were getting hit all the time with missiles. Metropolitan Police, 2011. I think we know where this comes from. An event that frightened the whole nation, London riots. And that's obviously from a policeman there because, as it says here, I'll just go into the connection. The researching and writing of Revolution Farm, had been influenced, I don't think it could not be, by popular social upheavals such as the London riots, 2011. Especially the question of whether the police had lost control during the riots. And I remember this was suggested, by several media commentators at the time. So, you're kind of thinking, what if the London riots had not been stopped? Just what would a revolution by lawless young people look like? Yeah, interesting. These were some of the questions that fed into the writing of Revolution Farm. And I employed a language in the play that was brutal, raw, and stripped down in order to explore Orwell's political message in today's context of social unrest and austerity. For example, when the animals returned victorious from terrorising the farmer off the farm, the younger ones, and again, so this line I'm going to show you, the actors who said it were the children in the play, and I think they start up a chant that I think, in my opinion, mimics the explosive and violent potential of urban unrest. And by young kids, perhaps it's even more disconcerting. So again, I did feel that worked quite well. The use of urban demotic speech together with the cast dressed in hoodies and trackies gave the play an unmistakable contemporary relevance. This is a major point, I think, here, but I think you can achieve this, just as well in a theatre, auditorium. Clearly you can, if the writing's good enough, the direction's good enough, it's powerful, you can. But I like to think, I would argue that what was unique and original about Revolution Farm was its setting and the farm's surrounding environments, Canary Wharf, etc., that gave the production it was genuinely troubling and disconcerting edge. Theatre stripped away of all its usual niceties. There's no seats, no curtains, not even ice creams. Oh no. Just one's imagination or paranoia raging away, and I'll come back to that paranoia idea, why I've put that in. I think it's generally understood that site-specific theatre can often change the relationship between an audience and play, with the comfort, complacency, perhaps, of a conventional theatre auditorium, when this is removed and it's replaced with something new, strange, unfamiliar, and that's no exception with Revolution Farm. Clearly it needed to be a promenade production, because we had all these spaces. You know, it's a wonderful opportunity when, you know, a working farm says, yes, you can do a play here, you know, and we'll give you all these spaces. So it's, you know, it's great fun to have done that. But I think there's other interesting things you can do with an audience when they're taken out of their theatrical comfort zones, as it were. So the play's director, James Martin, head of media here. He's collaborated on a number of my plays. I guess you could call him my preferred director of choice, because we worked together, you know, for quite a while, for a long time. And it's interesting what he said about this, about what you could do with the audience, you know, playing with their fears, possibly, you know, their insecurities. So he consciously played on the audience's preconceived or stereotypical, you could argue, fears around Beckton. Because if you get off the tube, it's DLR, you're probably thinking, yeah, DLR's nice, and it is. And you get off at DLR, I think it's Royal Albert. But the minute you get off and have to walk up to go to Newham City Farm, I'm not surprised James wrote this. And it did manifest itself in the production. Audiences who walked from the tube, who parked in an area previously unknown to them, were greeted by the sight of youths hanging around in the farm. Youths in hoodies. That favourite nightmare figure of the tabloid press and media, made into figures of terror by news reports of stabbings and gang membership. My intention, James's intention, as director, was not to alleviate an audience's anxieties about Beckton and inner city youth, but rather to bring their fears into the open. What if the hoodie hanging around on this Beckton farm turned to them and revealed an animal snout? Which is exactly what happened. A number of inquiries we got, nervous inquiries when they're coming up to the farm. Excuse me, is this where a play is? Is this where a play is? You know, is this Newham City Farm? You know, and I can understand that because it, you know, it didn't look particularly inviting, or at least it didn't look like a conventional place where, you know, even for site-specific theatre, you'd see a play. So, my last chapter, those youths in hoodies, coming to the end here. Yeah, so how did I get that special permission? I think I was kind of beginning with that. I mean, obviously, I had, you know, I was in discussion with the agent, A.M. Heath agents who represent George Orwell's estate. And initially, she said, "I don't know why you want to do this, because the estate feels there's too many adaptations already, and there's a musical coming on, a musical." I'm being judgmental, aren't I? But I'm sorry. Musical on Animal Farm, what's the point? Anyway, she said, so they have to protect it. So, but, you know, if you can give them, you know, why do you want to do, she literally said, why do you want to do a new version? You know, and I explained to her about the combination of, you know, professional actors and young people in the cast, and introducing a new generation, you know, to the work of George Orwell. And as it says here, I think it was the power of the hoodie that swung it. As I say, those hoodies that hung about the farm when audiences arrive are actually part of the plays, and I'd argue quite novel mixed economy casting. You have professional actors and young people who are, you know, who are interested in acting from the area, but because of their, perhaps you could argue, disadvantaged backgrounds, it might be difficult to get to drama school, you know. So they have these opportunities. And they get, you know, it gives them a chance, genuine chance to demonstrate their potential and talent. So this is what I wrote in the application to the estate. We're particularly keen to introduce a new generation of inner city young people from disadvantaged background to Orwell's story. From what I gather, you know, the agent said it was really hard, which I find, I don't know, I'm going off script here a bit, but I find absolutely disgraceful, because I feel that George Orwell would have approved of something like this, I feel. You know, anyway, you know, she did manage to get the permission, but it had to be, the title had to be changed. Yeah. They're clever, these agents. She said, you know, we understand that what you're doing here, but A, you've got to change the title, and B, you'll have to say inspired by. So it became Revolution Farm, inspired by Animal Farm, which is fine, absolutely fine. I was quite glad it's changed the title, really, in a way, because it sort of, you know, put my mark on it. Although she did say, I remember saying, just a bit of scurrilous gossip here, you'd like to hear some scurrilous gossip about this agent? When I talked to her on the phone, I was quite nervous, because they're a huge agency. You're talking Alan Bennett, you're talking all the greatest writers she represents, and I'm not in that league. And when she said to me, talk to me about your adaptation, talk to me. What have you done with it? And I went, well, obviously I've kept the story intact, obviously, but I have changed the language, to reflect where it's performed. And she said, what do you mean? I found myself saying, well, it's kind of urban. And she said, oh, what, you mean lots of innits? I thought, how patronising. I wanted to put the phone down then, but I needed her permission. So she was a little bit scathing and patronising about it. And maybe that's why they allowed it. But it was only for those performances in Newham City Farm. It can't be performed anywhere else. And the script can't be published until George Orwell comes out of copyright, which is 2 years. So I haven't got that long away. Final bit just to mention, the BBC broadcaster journalist Libby, I think that's Libby, is it Purvis or Purves? But she's quite well known actually as a commentator. Purvis, Libby Purvis. Yeah, I was going to say, that's why I thought I'd check with you, Paul.
Somebody told me, I didn't know.
Now, I really particularly, Paul Taylor from The Independent, that's a wonderful thing to, clearly, it's incredible to say a terrifically powerful update of Orwell's classics. So I think I must have done something fairly well there. But I really like this from her. She came and saw it and vindicated this approach, when she wrote in her review of the play, I have to say, the greatest pleasure was seeing those splendid, spiritedly performing Newham children getting an excellent political education about power, politics, and the need to keep asking questions. And the final bit I've written is, who knows whether Orwell, would have liked my hoodie adaptation. Maybe, maybe not. You can't spend too much time, can you, thinking about it. But I suspect he would have liked young people asking questions of the rich and powerful. So that's essentially my presentation. I'll just go have a look at some we'll quickly have a look at some photos. That's the barn. There they are, plotting. That's old boy, the cloth cap, plotting the revolution. Those are the animals around him. We can see we had anarchist and Occupy the Farm, which was a nod to the Occupy movement, which I quite liked. Again there, mask for old boy. Still plotting the revolution there. Now the power struggles begin. They now own the farm. That's Daddy Love. That's Smoothie. That's one of the obedient animals. Now clearly Smoothie's already making a case for Daddy Love to run things. Start introducing new rules when I thought, if you're one of the animals that took part in the revolution, you would say, and they did in my version, I don't get it. I thought we don't have rules anymore. And of course Smoothie's saying, well, without rules, they'll all come back, the humans. So these power struggles are starting. Indoctrination here. This is Hero, who objects to, as you could probably tell by the face, the language that's being used. That's Smoothie. And then, as you'll see in the next photo, there we go, the indoctrination of the young'uns. As we know, don't we, get them young. And they're all bored. They're just saying, yes, yes, here we've got some of the changes there. Animals are not scum. Wondering where it's going wrong there, Warrior, which I love that look. That's something like a Millwall football thug. And Little Monster. Kind of, it shows on there on the, again, this outdoor learning centre, that they sense that things are going wrong with the revolution. Again, quite like that photo. Warrior, but he'll still get stuck into all the the heavy labour tasks like rebuilding the windmill. Even though it's not the revolution he recognises. It's quite poignant, I think. So maybe, some of the audience were greeted by this. It doesn't look that particularly menacing, but it's perhaps not a site that, you know, it sort of blurred the lines between, is this the play or is this just young people hanging around? You couldn't work it out initially until they started moving and saying lines. I think the final one, yeah, although we didn't use, I think it's a shame I haven't got an image of where we use the horse's paddock, where it's got a better representation of the end of the play, where they all have these banners. They've been taught what to say. So this is kind of, I'm afraid, you know, the death of the revolution, where these are the new recruits and they're born into, you know, complete obedience. Yeah, and that's it. Thank you for listening. Thank you.
Can I ask something?
Yeah, of course, please do.
I mean, you talk a lot about space specific and about the place, but I want to ask about time. So is it also time specific? Because if it's like open outside, I suppose it makes a lot of difference if it's during daylight or during nighttime. So from the pictures, I guess the performance was during daytime or what both?
Yeah, it's a good question, actually. We actually had matinees and evening performances, and I always preferred the evening. You know, we've got an actual whole film of it, again, filmed by Middlesex. And, yeah, in the afternoon, and in fact, it only rained once, I think. But in the evening, what happened, I don't know how I can describe this to give it justice. So we start at 7 o'clock. By the time, and it's only about an hour and 15 minutes, but by the time you start realising, you start thinking, yeah, this is not going to end well, the light starts to fade, which gives it quite an evocative atmosphere. So by the time that they're, you know, in the horse's paddock and Daddy Love and Smoothie are basically, you know, it's like as I say, a North Korean style military parade. It's almost, you know, the light has faded. Well, I thought, adds to it, adds to that atmosphere.
And then when they moved from one space to the next, was it like the time moved as well, or was like one scene and then you move to the next space and you have people or animals doing something supposedly the same time as the previous one, it's just different?
When you say, what, in time in terms of the narrative,
Yeah,
you know?
and the narrative.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it is, I suppose a period of a year, you know, actually, and that was, I guess that was achieved by, literally moving to a new space. It showed the passage of time. Yeah.
I think time out knew what we were talking about. It sounds fascinating. It really does. I would just wonder, in terms of the photographs, the pictures, it reminded me in some respects of kind of Greek tragedy, in the sense that it's in daylight, there's masks and things like that. So one part of the question is how kind of traditional was the play in some respects, and also kind of this idea of kind of daylight and sort of actors and audiences being able to see each other. I always think of kind of Oliver Taplin's sort of idea of kind of astrophos, in the light of day, this kind of mutual reciprocity between actors and audiences. And how much did you manage to bring the audience into the play, by the fact that they were kind of able to see each other and kind of hanging around?
Yeah, that's a fascinating question, Des, actually. Yeah, I found that really, really interesting. You know, I mean, my job was done by the time the playwright, so the director's got to observe and take notes, hopefully, and the actor's got to perform. But I could just enjoy it, walking around, and being with the audience. That is fascinating when you quite clearly see their expressions. And possibly even what they're thinking at times, because they were quite close in the action. I think, in fact, in one of the scenes in the barn, we didn't allow them into the barn at one point where the killing was going on. And that really was quite disconcerting, because all you could hear was the voices of not only the adult actors, but the young children screaming in that blacked out barn. But we left the audience outside. And, I remember seeing somebody once going, what is going on in there? So it really does expose it, your reactions, your responses. It's quite interesting. Yeah, Melanie.
You talked a lot about adapting it and trying to make it different from the original, which obviously was your intention, because it was turning it into a modern play. But if you were intending to adapt a story and keep it close to the original, would the process have been similar, or would it have been completely different entirely?
I think it would have been very different. Yeah. Do you mean the language of the? the original.
Well, you went through sort of the steps that you took to try
Yeah.
and make sure it was different. Obviously, let's say you were trying to create the first dramatic interpretation of a text. You wouldn't necessarily need to make it that much different. So are those steps very specific to just when you're trying to firmly adapt it in the way that you were?
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
are they sort of applicable for any form of adaptation?
Well, that's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, clearly it was just just thinking once I'd got the permission, I just couldn't believe what I'd agreed to or what I'd managed to get. You know, I just thought this. I'm sure there's all sorts of, you know, methods in adaptations, but I guess it's not a bad one, is it? Because, you know, an adaptation, what's the point of an adaptation, I think, if it's too similar? So it certainly helped me pushing aside, or any kind of recollection of the language Orwell uses, because you just can't help it. And I come back to that confidence of ignorance. I don't think I could have done it any other way. I certainly got a first draft that no one can ever see that is like Orwell. And I was so ashamed of myself. I thought, what a waste of time. Yeah, so not only have you copied Orwell, but, you know, copied him really badly. You know, you might as well just go, oh, right, I'm never going to read Animal Farm again. In fact, I only read it, as I said, a few pages. I'm going to do my own thing. So
the process of an adaptation really is to look at the general storyline and then to recreate it yourself.
I found that useful. I certainly find that, I would do that. I think Anna mentioned next project is, I can say it now, can I? Hope funding permitting, of course, is a version of Alice in Wonderland set in Canning Town on an adventure playground called Alice in Canning Town. I will do the same process again. Yeah, absolutely. Because if you read Lewis Carroll, I mean, it's unimprovable, isn't it? His version, you've got to make your own mark on it. Otherwise, again, I would argue, what's the point? You might as well do something new. Yeah.
So, if you were to give someone advice, if they decided to look up the script right now, how or why do you decide to take some characters out? How do you go about the whole process of pulling out some characters, some that we think may have been the main character in the original story? For example, Mr. Jones.
Yeah. Well, I think, you know, it comes back to my, maybe they're dogmatic, views about theatre. At its best for me is when the audience can fill in the gaps. And I thought, well, yes, it's part practical. We have got funding. We pay our actors, the writer, commission, but it's not a lot. And we can only have a cast of 5 professional actors. Yes, we've got lots of kids who from the area who want to act and want to be in it. So, it's part practical. Perhaps if I'm being honest, I just thought, well, it sounds absolutely unbelievable, outlandish to say this, but, it's like George Orwell, there's quite a lot of exposition in Animal Farm, dare I say. I don't need it in a play. Obviously, it's completely different, a novel and a performance. But, of course people know that by the way the animals are talking, by the very fact they're plotting a revolution, must suggest quite strongly that Mr. Jones is horrible. And as far as the humans are concerned, again, I just didn't see that as integral to the narrative in what we were going to do on the farm. I'm not sure what it would add to it in terms of performance.
I have 2 questions.
2.
Because yes or no answers. The chant that we did, and I can't remember the words in the chant. You kill the spirit.
Oh, right, smash them up, break their bone.
Was that a reference to Lord of the Flies? Kill the, an inversion. Kill the pig, beat him, do him in.
You see, I'm new to this, aren't I, still? Because next time I go, oh, of course. Of course it was. No, I wasn't conscious of that, no. Thinking about it, yeah, I can see it, but I hold my hands up, I wasn't. But next time I will.
Okay, well,
So, Lord of the Flies, absolutely. You've got the reference.
And then also, right, slightly more esoteric, even for literature students. You've got to decide whether you're going to be the problem or the solution. surely that's the MC5.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Okay.
Do you know, no one spotted that in the script. I did. Is when Hero whips up the animals, and I thought there is a fantastic track, isn't there? Where and is it? Yeah, kick out the jams in the '60s, and you got this screaming voice saying, "You part of the problem. You're going to be part of the solution." So I thought, take that line, and we'll have Hero using it. So yeah, that reference was deliberate. Oh, yeah.
Can I ask about the young participants, the amateur actors? How did they respond? Did they come up with any new suggestions of language or to adapt it even more specifically to their living?
Yeah, another very excellent questions. Yeah, I mean, if I'm being absolutely honest, I mean, my own experience of my plays being put on is I do take a back seat, in terms, of directing, and clearly because there's a director and designer. So it might have been, I don't know. I mean, I wasn't at rehearsals, every day. But it's a really good question because I thought I have to get this language right because those young'uns, as it were, it's the real thing. They will tell me. I think I did ask them. I said, "Are you still using Wasteman? You still using this badass?" It's like, yeah, sort of. But I suppose, as you know, you may know urban, these urban insults or idioms. They're updated, aren't they? Very, very quickly. So I thought, well, I could put new ones in, but they'd probably be out of date. As long as I think the young people felt comfortable with saying those lines, and I like to believe they did. Yeah.
Did you write it with James in mind to direct it? Because I mean, you read someone like Tony Harrison, the Common Chorus says it really common. There's 2 pages of notes about how it should be done, And do you write like that, or do you just, because if you know who's going to be directing it, you can become more relaxed about that side of your writing?
Oh yeah, no, that is interesting. I've thought about this. Yeah, I mean, not consciously, but I think I'm very fortunate with James as a director. He's also a playwright. So the language I use, some of which perhaps I didn't show a lot of it in this paper. Some of the more lyrical, creative writing, I know that he'll know where that's coming from, and be able to direct it, be able to say to the actors, "This is why Jim is using this language at this point."
So in 2 years' time, if it is published, would someone else be able to direct it from what you've written with your kind of vision in mind? Do you think it would be very different?
I hope it would be very different. I mean, I've always said that stage directions is the thing I'm least interested in. I remember my first play, play called Gob. It just began with a street in London. And I thought, well, I don't write visually, so the director can do this. The director can ask me, he or she can ask me, what do you mean by street in London? But I'd rather not. I'd rather say, well, that's your job. So I hope it would be really different.
Yeah, that actually leads on quite well, because I was going to say there's very little stage direction in the script you've written. And when I watched the adaptation of it, it sort of reinvented it in my mind, because it was so different to what I'd imagined because of the lack of description in the script.
Yeah.
So is that a process that you'd recommend, sort of leaving as much up to the director as possible? Or do you find that it's completely dependent on what type of thing you're writing?
I think you know what? I think it's an individual. It's an individual thing. There's some writers, I think Basil just said, there's some playwrights, my God, just with Samuel Beckett. Stage directions, you do not disrespect that. You do not disrespect that, under pain of death. Or some other writers that have loads, really detailed. Probably Alan Bennett is one. Probably necessarily, because of the style. But I have to admit, as you've spotted there, Natalie, if you looked at my scripts, they're virtually bereft of any stage direction. And if it sounds funny, it might sound bizarre to say it, but because I just love language so much, and I think I've got some facility with dialogue, visually, as I said, I don't write visually, and it bores me to death, because I feel even if I did put stage directions in, or conjured up a visual scene, invariably the director and the designer would change it. You know, if they're worth their salt, artistic salt, they want to put their stamp on it. But and especially for something like a farm, I think, you know, because again, as you saw in the beginning, you know, I'm not the most practical of people, and I thought I wouldn't even know how to divide that farm up in terms of the narrative.
No, an issue came up about this afternoon. This isn't my point, but like we were discussing it in class. I can't even remember who said it or whether they're here now, but you know the final scene, which takes place after a time lapse, you know, a considerable time
Yes,
lapse.
yeah.
That is a director's scene, surely, because in the although it's mentioned in the script, you know, you need a different space in order to signify that this is when this event is taking place a year later.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I say, that's one of my favourite, you know, bits of the production. Is in the horses paddock, the children now being lined up, having these banners about obeying, you know, their rulers, because these were the new. They were just freshly born, so they don't need indoctrinating. They were literally born into this dictatorship. Yeah, that scene was. I thought that was really well done, but. I can't actually remember because I haven't been to the script. I mean, have you been looking at the script? You know, is at the end. I don't know whether I actually put in the end. I wanted. This might be interesting. Hopefully, I wanted. There's some sort of optimism to the end, and I don't know whether I can't remember whether I put right at the end that little monster returns.
Yeah. So the little monster hands out flyers. That say everyone link up at the barn tonight, 12 sharp.
Well, on few thing, I don't think that happened. Now, there was a potential clash between the director and myself. Because I did say, I've seen some performances and Little Warrior hasn't returned. Why is this? You know, he said, we are doing it, but we're doing it in a really subtle way. And, you know, you have to listen to the director, you know, because I think his point was, you know, it's very powerful, that ending, the way it was produced and directed. And he just wondered whether it would be, you know, the audience might think, you know, this is a bit pat. If we have someone coming back and I'll, you know, rescue you and so on. So I'm used to it now. I think if you write particularly plays, sometimes the gulf between, you know, what's the theory, what's in your head, and what works on stage is massive. You know, even if you're used to it, writing plays, it's as I say, I have no practical sense when writing a play. It's all to do with the language. It's all to do with the language. So often, yeah, the directors say, this isn't going to be really possible, or this is why we don't think this scene, you know, may work in this way.
You're not very precious about that interaction and that process, but you know, in British art, you know, television especially, but also in film and in the theatre, the writer is afforded this major auteur status, much more than, you know, much more than in the United States. Say, you know, what your position on that. I mean, obviously you're not precious, but do you think it's the case that in Britain that a lot of writers don't like directorial interference or...
That's a very diplomatic way of putting it. What have you done to my script?
Yeah, you know, that's
yeah. Well, I certainly think I can't really speak for TV and film, you know, as my background is a playwright. You know, in theatre, I think perhaps one of the reasons I don't feel precious is because I know that virtually 99% of my language will be, you know, I will see it and I hear it. It won't be cut without a lot of resistance from me. But I don't find it needs to be cut necessarily so much. So I'm quite, what's the word? I'm very comfortable with my own with my language, the dialogue I use. So if things do need to be cut, it's that's fine as long as you give me a good reason for it. I still know that my trademark language will come through. TV and film, maybe it's quite different, a writer. I would have thought so, you know, because it's so visual. You know, and as you say, in films, in Hollywood, don't they? You know, apparently you know when you've been fired as a scriptwriter because the phone doesn't ring anymore, saying, where are these, you know, rewrites? It's incredible. Yeah.
Just coming back to
positivity or lack thereof of the ending, did you feel that the effect of updating the novel for the current political climate had an implicit call to action within the play, the audience?
That's a really, that's a fantastic question. I wish we'd had sort of questionnaires to give out. I don't know. I mean, it was troubling, that ending. I really felt, that's why I wanted that scene, that's with a note of optimism. It looked like there is no hope at all, and I'm not sure I wanted to give that message. But then at the same token, I didn't want it to be, false or pat by having, if it sounded or looked insincere, that there might be something going, something after, the close of the play. But I think I got the feeling, there's any kind of social action is going to be very, very, very tough, or social justice. Yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask something. You mentioned, I think you said it in the introduction here, that you're relying on the audience to fill the gaps. I'm not someone who, I don't go to a lot of plays or anything like that, but if I hadn't read, Animal Farm, or read a script or watched the thing come here, think about the Russian Revolution and everything else, and I just saw your play, I'm not sure if I would be able to fill the gaps. I don't know if, is that something that, as a scriptwriter, we need to think about your audience in terms of people who are not familiar with the background of.
Yeah, very much so. Very much. I mean, I think that's a continuing battle with internal, psychological battle with writers. How much information, exposition, is needed, and how much is taken out. I agree with you. I think, if you're not, that's a very good point. If you're not familiar with Animal Farm, and of course there is that. There may well be that scenario. Possibly my version might be a bit tricky in the beginning. And it is. It's certainly my desire to try and whittle it down, to whittle a play down just to language. Where you haven't got sets, you haven't got anything. No ice creams, no curtains, nothing. It's what you hear and what you see. The word and the action, where it's only the word and action. Everything else is redundant. Sometimes I think maybe it could be hard to follow that. Yeah. Especially, I think, because would you, I've got a question. Would you, theatre's, it's not a populist medium, is it? Theatre. TV and film surely is populist.
Well,
I feel like I'm in my supervision now.
It's very interesting stuff for supervision, really, because we are dealing with the contestation of interpretation. You have interpreted Orwell. You've handed it over to a director. You're using participants from the area, which are meant to be implicit into this plot that you've created. And then you have the audience, of course. So we have four factors battling over meaning here. And I think it's a really interesting, ironic kind of situation for the theme of the story from the very start. Who is in charge of the meaning production? You're very humble as a writer, as Paul pointed out. You didn't have to be, but in a way it is like you are you're handing over a scenario with a trickle-down kind of meaning that hopefully reaches the audience. The director sifts it through his interpretation, and there's obviously been a discussion about the ending and so forth. You haven't used the questionnaire to catch the audience's perception, and so forth. But there is an irony here, because I've been doing a lot of devising about similar themes as Animal Farm. is almost always about pretty controversial issues. That's where you need devising, where everybody kind of creates a script on their own or together. But the irony of devising, that it would be amazing to see a devised piece on Animal Farm, is that
yes,
in that democratic kind of script writing collective, some people are always more equal than others.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That's fascinating.
So,
a collective approach
to. I
to.
don't have a question here, but it's a very interesting.
It is. I wouldn't mind seeing that myself, although I couldn't be part of it. Because you say I'm humble, and that's very nice to hear. But I mean, I must admit, probably, if I'm being honest, part of the humbleness is because I am going to say this: my writing doesn't get cut a lot. It doesn't need to, which I didn't want to say it because I didn't, or certainly not before, because it sounds arrogant. I think I can afford to be humble because, or if it does get cut, I can easily replace it. So I'm not precious about it in that respect. But I certainly couldn't do a devising, because I just want my take on it. I love these questions.
When you kind of kicked Orwell out from looking over your shoulder,
George, can you leave the room, George?
Was he ever let back in? And I mean,
I just love the image of that, knocking on the door. George, just leave it. Just go on, I'm working. He's a smoker, wasn't he? A big smoker. Yeah, go and write 1984.
I mean, do you think it is therefore a version? Or do you think it is your own play that is just inspired by? If it is just kind of plot points, and he never kind of came back and never revisited in any depth at all.
I did feel that, when at that point, as it were, metaphorically, leaving the room, that it was never again did I think about, him or the original Animal Farm. So I like to think it is, it is definitely it's my version of it, or I suppose you could argue my response to it, because obviously the story and the plot has not been tampered with. Well, yes, some pieces of the plot have been left out. But essentially, everyone would recognise it. It's essentially the story of a revolution that went wrong.
I wanted to point out a bit of tampering, right? Because it's a good bit of tampering, I think. I've got two classes at the moment where I've been talking about characters. So a class where we've been talking about fairy tales, Animal Farm is a fairy tale. And we've been sort of thinking about the flatness of characters, and the flatness of description, which hastens interpretations and, moral interpretations in particular. And then I think that I have a class where we've been talking about the eschewing of flatness, in order to produce realism and rounded characters in the Western tradition of narrative and so on. So, there's flat characters and there's the rounded characters. Now, your source material deals with flat characters throughout. They stand for certain things and there's very little change. However, the flattest character in the source material in Animal Farm, and I don't know if this was deliberate, becomes a rounded character the only rounded character in this play. It's the boxer character.
I'm so glad you said that. Boxer warrior. You're spot on.
There's a moment.
It's the one I loved writing so much for.
And that is quite an audacious thing to do in a flat story. It's as if, suddenly Little Red Riding Hood's mother, you find out about her, miscarrying, about her cancer, and things like that, whereas she's just deciphering the story.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Paul. I think I did actually enjoy writing, for Warrior, and I feel it's a kind of characteristic I know quite well. Although I'm not from East London, I have worked a lot of, in areas in East London on creative writing workshops with, people that were, that felt they've been excluded from the writing process, and I think, there's that. I seem to recall there's the part where about Little Monster is encouraging him to read. I can't see the point. And it's always fascinated me, Warrior, that is the kind of life and soul, or the soul of that revolution, who do anything to make it work. but he's complicit in a way. He's complicit in his downfall. I find that really, really, really interesting. I'm sure there's some, greater minds than mine in this room about, political theories about this. How working class, for want of a better word, yeah. But you're absolutely right. I think Botts is pretty straightforward, if I can say that about Orwell's character, and hopefully in mine there's a bit more complexity there going on, or at least certainly the actor felt he could get stuck into.
And did extremely well.
So yeah, absolutely, yeah. Thanks, Ola.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks. See you soon.
I think on that
Thank you.
note, we would thank James with another round of applause. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. It's lovely. It's wonderful. Thanks for the questions. They're really fascinating.
And I will see you
Yeah.
all next week. Same time, different place.